when you, as Prime Minister, set yourself up with a debating point of I'm going to cut the waiting lists, and you can only say that they've started to come down after going back up a bit, you've set yourself up for that, frankly.
When you're arguing that up is down, then it's tricky. Thought we'd go for some non-partisan introduction, so we'd have Peter Dixon from the X Factor.
Well, he's been with us before. Maybe it's time Zippy came back as well. Would have liked to have seen him in the debate last night.
Before we'll pick our way through some of the key exchanges in a minute. Do you think either of them had the X Factor?
I think that the Tory spin doctors are much happier than the Labour ones. I think Rishi Sunak won't have surprised people in being slightly overly aggressive and slightly snippy, but in terms of landing his messages, he did a much better job than Keir Starmer. And I think Labour would have hoped Starmer turned up and looked prime ministerial, composed, and gave as good as he got in a sort of calm and grown-up way, and made Sunak look a bit silly. And there were moments, I'm afraid, where Starmer looked properly flustered. It wasn't quite clear whether he was shocked that Sunak was coming at him with these attacks. But he looked at times like he didn't know what to say, and he looked at times a little bit frightened. And I think people who were hoping this guy who appears to be stampeding towards a massive election win would have looked a little bit more composed under fire. It may be that in the subsequent debates he's better prepared. The most staggering thing I've heard in the last 24 hours is that Keir Starmer spent a lot of yesterday afternoon on his own in a hotel room, and he likes to prepare that way. He doesn't want people in his ear telling him what to say. Rishi Sunak, I can only presume, was in a proper debate camp with people giving him the lines that he needed to land and telling him how to respond, because Starmer, frankly, looked underprepared. And that
it was so interesting
perhaps explains
he had good lines, but they didn't they weren't the sum of their parts. Whereas Rishi Sunak had one line, the £2,000 thing, which we'll come to, but just sort of hammered away. What do you want people to remember at the end of this?
Yeah, and today we're having a big row about that £2,000 tax line, and of course Labour have some response to it, but we saw very little of that from Starmer for the first 45 minutes of the debate. And what you also do in a debate camp is you prepare for the format, and I don't think Starmer was quite ready for the fact that most of the opening sort of comments were quite short, and the comebacks were even shorter, and he's wasted a lot of time sort of flanneling around. And really, where was the 25-second clip? So broadly, the overview is Starmer landed quite successfully. We've had 14 years of this government, and it's not been a success. And Sunak landed fairly successfulage. Yeah, but what are you going to do about it? And where was the constant clips of we've had 14 years of this, we've got poo in the sewage in the rivers, we've got trains that don't work, the NHS has got problems, blah, 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 and just sort of like you would expect for the concluding answer at Prime Minister's question time.
A proper real-life shopping list. Yep. OK, let's dive in next. We've got lots of clips to get through. We'll kick off with the first question. Why not, as we would do if we were doing PMQs. But asking the question was a woman called Paula, who felt that the Prime Minister did not understand the cost of living crisis.
My dad worked in a factory. He was a toolmaker. My mum was a nurse. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, and we were in a position on occasion where we couldn't pay our bills. So I know how that feels. In our particular case, we had our phone cut off because we didn't have the money. So I do know the anguish of worrying when the postman comes with a bill. What is that bill going to be? Can I pay for it?
Are you saying
I don't think the Prime Minister quite understands the position that you and other people are in.
Actually, we've been sort of more complimentary of Sunak. That was probably, I thought, one of Sunak's worst moments right at the beginning. There was almost no empathy, again, from the PM for people who have got problems with the cost of living. Starmer did that very well in that, but was immediately on the back foot. And I think, various people have tallied up how many times Sunak did this £2,000 attack line. Some say it's 13, others think it was nearer 20. But I can't say I've gone back through the whole thing myself. But that was right at the top of the show, and Starmer only got properly into this is garbage 45 minutes later. It has allowed the Tories to frame the debate a little bit, probably for the next 48 hours.
So that was the exchange on tax, the first question. Then the NHS. This is an audience member called Janet asking, there's a slight flaw in the format. We've only got 45 seconds to respond. Janet asked both men how they'd fix the National Health Service.
As Janet knows and everyone knows, the NHS is still recovering from COVID. We went through the best part of 2 years where the NHS couldn't conduct all the treatments it normally would, and it is going to take time to recover from that. But we are now making progress. The waiting lists are coming down. But what Keir Starmer didn't mention to you, which you did, Julie.
Waiting list 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. He says they're coming down, and this is the guy who says he's good at maths.
Yeah, they are now coming down. They are now coming down.
7.2 when you said you get them down. 7.2 million, they're now 7.5 million. I'd like you to explain how they're coming down.
Because they were coming down from where they were when they were higher.
7.2.
And they're now on their way down. They are down, right? Yes, because the NHS was impacted by industrial action. And if it wasn't for that, 500,000 appointments would have been saved.
So it's somebody else's fault.
Probably Keir Starmer's best debating moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, and you never want to hear laughter.
Laughter followed by a groan.
Yeah, ridicule from the audience there. I don't know if we're going on to do the doctor's strike, but Sunak hit back pretty quickly and put Starmer on the back foot. But yeah, that was not great. I mean, both of them are correct. Waiting lists are still higher than they were when Sunak took power, but they have been coming down for several months.
And the point that Rishi Sunak made was that he argued some of the problems, and they're sort of both right. It depends on where you start counting.
Yeah.
They are down from where they were, the waiting lists, but they're still not down as low as they were when he
And this is the
said.
point about what Sunak set himself up for by coming up with these 5 goals that he was going to set himself. I think the public do accept that COVID was this was a major event in all our lives. We all remember what it was like. We know that has impacted the NHS. That's a perfectly reasonable point. But when you, as Prime Minister, set yourself up with a debating point of I'm going to cut the waiting lists, and you can only say that they've started to come down after going back up a bit, you've set yourself up for that, frankly.
When you're arguing that up is down, then it's tricky. Reaching for the Liz Truss thing was probably a demonstration that, it was interesting that potentially Keir Starmer's best moment was then immediately followed by Rishi Sunak's best moment.
Yeah, exactly. And this was, obviously on the radio, but there was a moment during that exchange where Starmer kind of closed his eyes, much more than a blink. He looked sort of properly like, I don't really know quite how to come at this. And I think the wider significance of this is that on a range of subjects, I think this is one, I think probably doing business with the EU, dealing with immigration. On all of these, Labour genuinely believes that if they turn up and be Labour rather than the Tories and be nice, they'll be able to get things done. And I think that's something that is open to challenge. And I think the upshot of this debate, given that the polls are suggesting Labour is on for a big old win, I think it will cause people to focus a little bit more on what they're actually going to do. And I think in a range of areas, they haven't said that much. And some of it appears to be a bit wishful thinking.
And crucially, to some extent, the way that Rishi Sunak was challenging him was almost saying, look, you're going to be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And they do not have an answer to that.
No, they don't. And the same came up a little bit on illegal immigration later. These were the moments where Starmer didn't sort of really seem to kind of know where he was coming from.
Well, in fact, let's move on to the conversation on illegal immigration. Obviously, it's sort of slightly more up in people's minds, because of Nigel Farage. Probably the biggest. We thought that this was going to be the debate was going to be the biggest event of this week in terms of the election campaign. But this was both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer insisting they both really did have a plan to tackle illegal immigration.
Over the last 12 months, the number of crossings are down a third because the plans we put in place are starting to make a difference. But the choice of this election is about the future. I believe you need to have a deterrent. The only way to stop this problem is to say to people who come here illegally, they cannot stay and they will be removed. If I'm your Prime Minister, the planes will go to Rwanda, we will have a deterrent. So the simple question for Keir Starmer is, what will you do with people who come here illegally? What will you do with them? Well, very simply, what will you do with them? That's what I'm going to do. We'll have a deterrent. What are you going to do?
We need to smash the gangs that are running this vile trade, making a huge amount of money, putting some of the most vulnerable people in boats across the channel. They're making a fortune. Before I was a politician, Stephen, I was the Director of Public Prosecutions, and I worked with the police and prosecutors in other countries to bring down terrorist gangs who are running across borders. I do not believe it's impossible to bring down these gangs. What I won't do is engage in an expensive gimmick, the Rwanda scheme. If he believed it was going to work, he wouldn't have called an election before it can be tested. He wouldn't have done it.
So, you do with illegal migrants who...
Would you consider processing asylum claims in a third country, Keir Starmer?
Yes, if that was possible to do it in compliance with international law, of course. But just let me deal with this, because...
So you do now agree?
OK, so you...
honestly,
now, you've just changed
I
your
thought we were
mind
not
on
going
this.
to talk over
Hang
each
on.
other.
So you do now agree with third country deals?
Be clear, that is a yes.
I've been crystal clear. I will choose our country's security ahead of membership of a foreign court every single time.
Very clear answer. Keir Starmer, respond to that directly to Rishi Sunak, please.
No, if I'm Prime Minister, we will not pull out of international agreements and international law, which is respected the world over.
Just sum up, essentially, the hour and 10 minutes of it all was Keir Starmer saying, nothing you've done has worked. Pick the topic, you've got a failed record. And him saying, well, what would you do? And they're not really being an answer.
That's it. That's absolutely it. And I think, you know, some voters will have tuned in with a very strong view about which person they liked, and most of the polling that came afterwards suggests they haven't really changed their minds very much. I mean, the Snap poll afterwards had Sunak winning 51-49.
You've got one, but there's been others.
But there have been others.
Savanta,
I think, said it had it the other way around. I mean, you know, assuming the default position was Sunak 20 points behind, because that's kind of where we are, that's a reasonable outcome for the Prime Minister. But if you look at drill down into the details, even in the YouGov Snap poll, you know, I think on, you know, who's... sounds like they care or whatever, Sunak was miles and miles behind. He was marginally ahead on who looks like the better Prime Minister. And, you know, I think the upshot is that a lot of people conclude that Sunak looked more like the Prime Minister, but they don't like him very much. And I don't think, arguably, anything he did last night is going to change that very much. But what it does do is cast a new light a little bit on Starmer, who we all expect to win. And I think there are perhaps a few more question marks about his readiness and about Labour's readiness than we perhaps had 24 hours ago.
Yeah, I think if your starting point was like you just landed from Mars and these two people were starting from the same place and who won, then that's one thing. Ultimately, Rishi Sunak, you know, can read the polls like the rest of us. It looks like Labour are going to win and win quite big. The best he could do was chip away at Keir Starmer's reputation in front of the best part of 5 million people, and he probably did do that, albeit that's not going to stop him becoming Prime Minister. No,
I mean, what it might do is if there were Tory MPs who were thinking, I might just defect to Reform and run for them, well, then maybe...
In fact, we've had news of one of those today. Tom Hunt, who's was the Conservative MP for Ipswich, is standing again, has confirmed he is going to stand for the Tories. He's not defected to Reform. And overnight, you know, the Nigel Farage hullabaloo a couple of days ago, clearly lots of them had started, you know...
I think there were some that were thinking about it, and it may be that they look at that and think, actually, I'll stick with it. And if you look at the other significant number in that polling, it was very, very divided on party lines. I mean, it was about 85-15. So if you're a Labour supporter, you thought 85% of them thought Starmer won it.
Yeah.
Tory voters from 2019, 85% of them thought Sunak won that debate. And actually, that's what they're going after. That's who they're targeting. And if that has shored up a bit of support and maybe peeled some off of Reform, I mean, I suspect the first polls that we'll get, you know, will show Reform getting a bounce off Farage's announcement. And that may end up being the big story of the week after all, and that it may not be the debate at all. But I think my sense from Tory Towers last night was that they feel like this is a key bit of firewall that stops the bleeding a little bit.